Commander Zephyr Blake was having one of those days where the coffee machine decided to commit suicide. His quantum tablet crashed during a critical presentation. And oh yes, an alien armada appeared in high Earth orbit. You know, a typical Tuesday at the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. Of course they'd show up during budget meetings, he muttered, straightening his chronically crooked tie while speed walking through the UN's corridors. Couldn't wait until after fiscal year planning, could they? At 43, Zephyr was what most would call aggressively average. Average height, average build, and an average face that seemed purpose-built for being forgotten in crowds. His one distinguishing feature was his perpetually disheveled salt and pepper hair that refused to conform to any known laws of physics, much like his career path. The emergency assembly hall was already packed when he arrived. Heads of state, military leaders, and fellow diplomats all stared at the massive holographic display, showing what could only be described as the galaxy's most impressive fleet of warships. They resembled massive crystalline arrowheads, if arrowheads were designed by someone with a serious god complex and too much time on their hands. Ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished representatives, General Rodriguez announced, her voice cutting through the panicked whispers. The Kraxon Empire made contact 30 minutes ago. Their fleet consists of approximately 300 capital ships, each roughly the size of Manhattan. Zephyr squinted at the display, counting the ships. 312, he corrected automatically, earning a few irritated glances. His brain's tendency to fixate on random details was both his greatest asset and the reason he'd been passed over for promotion 6 times. The hologram flickered, and a new image appeared, their first look at a Kraxon. The alien resembled what might happen if you crossed a praying mantis with a chrome-plated luxury car. Its segmented exoskeleton gleamed with an iridescent sheen that probably cost more than Earth's entire defense budget. Primitive humans, the Kraxon's translated voice boomed through the speakers, managing to sound both bored and contemptuous. We are the Kraxon Empire, rulers of 16,000 star systems and architects of order throughout the galaxy. Your planet's strategic location has drawn our attention. Submit to our rule within your next planetary rotation, or face immediate eradication. Well, aren't they just a ray of sunshine, Zephyr mumbled, earning a sharp elbow from the Chinese ambassador. The hologram expanded to show detailed scans of the Kraxon fleet. Their technology was, to put it mildly, terrifying. Each ship bristled with weapons that made nuclear arsenals look like water pistols. Their shields could supposedly withstand the energy output of a small star, and their armor was made of some material that technically shouldn't exist according to human physics. Their smallest support vessel, Rodriguez continued, carries enough firepower to level Europe, the entire continent, in about 30 seconds. Zephyr raised his hand, looking for all the world like a bored student in class. Quick question, did anyone else notice they're maintaining a suspiciously precise orbital position? Almost like they're worried about something up there. Everyone ignored him. They were too busy watching the Kraxon commander list their military achievements, which apparently included destroying 17 civilizations that had refused their generous offer of submission. The alien seemed particularly proud of how efficiently they'd reduced those worlds to radioactive ash. As the assembly dissolved into chaos, with various officials arguing about surrender versus futile resistance, Zephyr's mind wandered to a peculiar thought. He remembered an old problem he'd been working on just yesterday, calculating safe orbital trajectories around Earth's rather embarrassing collection of space junk. A slow, slightly unhinged smile spread across his face. Sometimes, the most remarkable solutions come from the most unremarkable people. And sometimes, humanity's biggest mistakes might just turn out to be their greatest weapons. But first, he needed more coffee. Saving Earth from aliens required at least a triple espresso. The emergency UN session had devolved into exactly the kind of chaos Zephyr had expected. Military leaders were frantically presenting battle plans that all ended with variations of ... And then we die gloriously. Politicians were arguing about whether to surrender with dignity or without it. Someone from a small island nation was proposing they try to bargain with coconuts. Our missile systems are useless against their shields, the U.S. Admiral declared, pointing at simulation after simulation of failed attacks. Our most advanced weapons can't even scratch their paint job. Perhaps the Russian general countered, we could attempt electromagnetic pulse. Their ships are hardened against solar flares that would make our strongest imps look like static electricity, interrupted the Chinese defense minister. Zephyr sat in his corner, absently doodling orbital patterns on his tablet, while the world's most powerful people competed to see who could paint the bleakest picture. His mind wandered back to his graduate school days, specifically to Professor Chen's infamous Garbage Day lecture. Space, the ancient professor had declared, is the only place where humans have managed to litter at 28,000 kilometers per hour. Young Zephyr had been the only one to laugh at what turned out not to be a joke. A single fleck of paint. Chen continued, traveling at orbital velocity carries the kinetic energy of a hand grenade. A piece the size of a grape could punch through the International Space Station like tissue paper. And we've got about 100 million pieces of junk up there, dancing around our planet like drunk teenagers at prom. That lecture had sparked Zephyr's peculiar fascination with space debris tracking, leading to his current job, which mostly involved making sure satellites didn't crash into flying garbage. The irony that this might now be humanity's salvation was not lost on him. "Excuse me," Zephyr called out, raising his hand again. The room ignored him. He tried again, louder. Still nothing. Finally, he did something completely out of character. He stood on his chair and whistled with 2 fingers. The entire assembly turned to stare at him, expressions ranging from scandalized to murderous. "Hi, yes, hello," he began, straightening his tie nervously. "Quick question, has anyone noticed that the Kraxon fleet is maintaining an unusually high orbit, about 100 kilometers above our typical satellite range?" Commander Blake, General Rodriguez, sighed. "This is hardly the time to discuss orbital mechanics." "Actually, it's exactly the time," he replied, connecting his tablet to the main display. "You see, we've been trying to figure out how to attack their ships while completely ignoring the fact that we've already got the perfect weapon surrounding our planet. We just spent the last 60 years building it by accident." The hologram filled with tracking data for Earth's orbital debris field, hundreds of thousands of objects, from defunct satellites to lost screwdrivers, all zooming around the planet at killer speeds. "We've got approximately 128 million pieces of tracked debris up there," Zephyr continued, warming to his subject. "Everything from paint flakes to entire rocket stages. And here's the fun part, the Kraxons are specifically avoiding it. Their ships are maintaining position just outside our debris field." The room fell silent as understanding began to dawn. "Are you suggesting," the British Prime Minister asked slowly, "that we weaponize our orbital garbage?" "I'm suggesting," Zephyr replied with a grin that made several people uncomfortable, "that we've already got the largest minefield in human history sitting right above our heads. We just need to rearrange it a bit." He pulled up more diagrams, showing orbital trajectories and velocity calculations. "Their shields are designed to stop energy weapons and explosives, but I bet they never planned for millions of pieces of supersonic trash moving at roughly 17,500 miles per hour. The Russian general leaned forward, a predatory gleam in his eye. "Could we control it?" "We've got tracking data on everything larger than a centimeter. Most of the bigger pieces have predictable orbits, with some careful calculations and our existing satellite networks." Zephyr paused for dramatic effect. "We could turn our space junk into the galaxy's fastest game of dodgeball, and they'd be playing blindfolded." As if on cue, the hologram flickered, and the Kraxon commander reappeared. The alien's mandibles clicked in what everyone assumed was annoyance. "Humans," it announced, "we are adjusting our terms. You now have 48 of your planetary rotations to submit to our rule. We are feeling merciful." Zephyr noticed the slight hesitation in the alien's voice, the way its antennae twitched when mentioning the extended deadline. They were worried about something, and he was pretty sure he knew what it was. "They're scared of our mess," he announced after the transmission ended. "They're giving us more time because they're trying to figure out how to safely navigate through 6 decades worth of human litterbugging." The room erupted into a flurry of activity. Military leaders who'd been planning last stands were now huddled around Zephyr's orbital diagrams. Scientists were running simulations. Someone was already designing mission patches for Operation Space Junk. As the assembly transformed from a funeral planning committee into something resembling hope, Zephyr allowed himself a small smile. Sometimes the best solutions weren't about having the biggest guns or the strongest shields. Sometimes they were about turning your greatest embarrassment into your greatest strength. Right then he announced, cracking his knuckles, "Let's go play catch with the aliens." But first, does anyone know if the coffee machine's been fixed? Operation Space Junk's command center looked less like a military installation and more like a particularly chaotic recycling facility. Screens displayed thousands of tracked objects, from ancient Soviet satellites to that wrench astronaut Thompson definitely didn't mean to drop during a spacewalk in 1987. The coffee machine was finally working, though it now produced something that tasted suspiciously like rocket fuel. "Let's review our arsenal," Zephyr announced to the assembled team of scientists, military personnel, and what he suspected was at least one janitor who'd wandered in by accident but seemed to have good ideas. "First, we've got about 23,000 objects larger than 10 centimeters. The pride of our collection includes." He clicked through his presentation one completely intact Falcon 9 second stage from 2019, currently tumbling end over end like a cosmic ballerina. 3 Soviet-era spy satellites that were definitely never there officially. A toolkit that cost NASA $100. 000 and spent exactly 4 minutes in an astronaut's possession before choosing freedom. Oh, and my personal favorite, a camera that an Italian astronaut swears was stolen by a space gecko. Then we've got about 500,000 pieces between 1 and 10 centimeters. Think screws, bolts, and chunks of satellites that had unfortunate disagreements with other satellites. And finally, the real stars of our show, roughly 128 million pieces smaller than 1 centimeter. Mostly paint flakes and frozen coolant droplets, all moving at speeds that would make a bullet blush. Dr. Wong, their lead orbital mathematician, raised her hand. "We've calculated that redirecting approximately 17% of the larger debris could create a cascading effect, essentially turning our orbital sphere into a high-speed blender." "Excellent," Zephyr replied, then paused. "Wait, what exactly do you mean by cascading effect?" "You ever play pool?" she asked, pulling up a simulation. "It's like that. Except every ball is moving at Mach 25, and instead of felt, the table is covered in explosive devices." The simulation showed their planned debris field adjustments. It started orderly enough, with larger pieces of space junk being nudged by carefully timed satellite burns. Then it descended into what looked like someone had given a tornado anger management issues. Meanwhile, the Kraxons were getting suspicious about Earth's apparent lack of either surrender or resistance. Their latest transmission featured their commander trying very hard to look intimidating while clearly being confused. "Your species in action is puzzling," the alien declared. "Perhaps you require a demonstration of our power." "Oh no, not at all," Zephyr had replied cheerfully. "We're just doing some light housekeeping. You know how it is, trying to tidy up before guests arrive." The aliens' antennae twitched in what their xenobiologists were starting to recognize as their equivalent of a nervous tick. The massive fleet remained stationed just outside Earth's debris field, their ships occasionally having to make minute adjustments to avoid stray objects that somehow kept drifting suspiciously close to their position. Back in the command center, the global coordination effort was reaching levels of cooperation that would have made the UN weep with joy if they weren't all too busy manning their stations. Russian space controllers were working seamlessly with American orbital analysts. Chinese satellite operators were sharing data with European tracking stations. Even North Korea had volunteered their assistance, though everyone tactfully ignored their suggestion to strap nuclear warheads to the space junk. Sir called out Lieutenant Rodriguez, no relation to the general, though they shared an impressive ability to function without sleep. The Indians have successfully redirected the remains of their 2025 weather satellite. The Japanese have confirmed trajectory changes for 5 defunct communication satellites. And the Brazilians, well, they say they've improvised something, but recommend we don't ask for details. Zephyr watched as the orbital paths on the main display began shifting, ever so slightly. It was like conducting an orchestra, where every instrument was a potential catastrophe waiting to happen, and the music was composed entirely of physics equations and prayer. "We've got movement in the Kraxon fleet," announced Captain Chen. The alien ships were adjusting their formation, spreading out in what they probably thought was a cautious manner. In reality, they were positioning themselves perfectly for what Dr. Wong had begun calling Operation Newton's Revenge. They still think we're doing nothing, Zephyr mused, watching the aliens' increasingly agitated movements. 60 years of leaving our trash in orbit, and they think we're just sitting here twiddling our thumbs. A junior analyst raised her hand. Sir, we're detecting energy signatures from their fleet. They appear to be charging weapons. Perfect timing, Zephyr replied, checking his watch. Our orbital adjustments should be reaching critical mass in about 17 minutes. Just enough time for one last coffee run. Anyone want anything from the machine? It's still making that thing that might be coffee, might be liquid entropy. The room was a flurry of activity, but underneath the chaos was a current of barely suppressed glee. Humanity was about to teach an advanced alien empire a valuable lesson about underestimating a species that had turned their own negligence into an accidental superweapon. As Zephyr watched the final pieces move into position, he couldn't help but smile. The Kraxons had superior technology, unimaginable weapons, and shields that could withstand the fury of a star. But they were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't the one you build on purpose, it's the mess you never bothered to clean up. Right then he announced to the room, "Let's show them why you should never pick a fight with a species that turned their orbital sphere into the galaxy's largest game of pinball." The Kraxon fleet's movement into attack formation was like watching a corporate PowerPoint presentation come to life, technically impressive but somehow still boring. Their ships arranged themselves in perfect geometric patterns that would have made Euclid weep with joy. "They're charging their main weapons," Captain Chen announced, his voice steady despite the coffee-induced tremor in his hands. Estimated time to firing position 3 minutes. Zephyr took a long sip from his questionable coffee. "Excellent. Dr. Wong, how's our orbital apocalypse coming along?" "The cascading effect begins in approximately 2 minutes and 47 seconds, she replied, not looking up from her calculations. "Though I should mention that my simulation software just crashed after displaying the message. Physics has left the chat." The main display showed the culmination of their work, thousands of pieces of carefully redirected space debris, all converging like the world's most dangerous connect-the-dots puzzle. The larger pieces, satellites, rocket stages, and that mysteriously disappeared Soviet space station that everyone pretended not to know about, were already beginning their final approach vectors. "Kraxon fleet is broadcasting," Lieutenant Rodriguez announced. The alien commander's hologram appeared, mandibles spread in what their xenobiologists had labeled as smug superiority with a hint of condescension. "Your time has expired, primitive ones," the Kraxon declared. "Your inaction has sealed you." The alien paused, its antennae suddenly twitching violently. "What is that?" "Oh," that Zephyr replied innocently. "Just 60 years of human procrastination coming home to roost. You might want to duck." The first impact came from a defunct GPS satellite, spinning end over end at roughly 17,500 miles per hour. It struck the shields of a Kraxon cruiser like a cosmic fastball. The alien vessel's shields flared brilliantly and then failed completely as the laws of physics reminded everyone that kinetic energy really doesn't care about your fancy energy barriers. "Status report," General Rodriguez barked. "The GPS satellite has. Well, it's made a GPS satellite-shaped hole through 3 Kraxon ships," Dr. Wong reported, her voice mixing awe and barely suppressed glee. "And that's just the opening act." What followed could only be described as chaos theory having a party with Murphy's Law, while Newton's laws of motion played the DJ. The carefully orchestrated debris field transformed into a lethal ballet of supersonic junk. Paint flakes moving at orbital velocities carved through alien armor like tiny hypervelocity bullets. A lost spanner from the International Space Station became an impromptu missile, pirouetting through space to punch through the bridge of a Kraxon dreadnought. "Their shields," a scientist exclaimed. "They're calibrated to stop energy weapons and explosives, but they can't handle physical impacts at these velocities." The Kraxon fleet's perfect formation dissolved into panic. Ships tried to maneuver away from the debris field, only to find themselves facing new waves of incoming garbage from different directions. A particularly dramatic moment came when the lost toolkit from NASA performed what could only be described as a drive-by screwdrivering of an alien flagship. Sir Captain Chen called out, trying to maintain professional composure while watching a piece of a 1960s weather satellite perform a perfect split shot between 2 Kraxon destroyers. They're attempting to return fire, but their weapon systems can't get a lock through the debris field. Also, I think that Soviet space station just took out their admiral's ship with. Was that a toilet? Cosmic Justice Zephyr nodded sagely. They threatened us with advanced technology, and we responded with the galaxy's fastest game of trash tag. The Kraxon commander's next transmission was considerably less composed. The alien's chrome-plated exoskeleton was now distinctly dented, and something that looked suspiciously like an astronaut's lost lunch bag was stuck to its antenna. What manner of weapons are these? It demanded, ducking as something whizzed past in the background. Our scan showed no advanced military technology. Oh, these aren't weapons, Zephyr replied cheerfully. This is just what happens when you pick a fight with a species that's been littering in space since the 1950s. Did you know we once lost an entire nuclear reactor up here? Keep an eye out for that one. It's probably due for a flyby any minute now. The debris field had become self-sustaining now, each impact creating new fragments that joined the celestial demolition derby. Dr. Wong's simulation had been right. It was exactly like a game of pool, if the pool balls were traveling at speeds that made light feel like it needed to step up its game. Remaining Kraxon ships are attempting to retreat, Lieutenant Rodriguez reported, not even trying to hide her grin. Though retreat might be generous, fleeing in blind panic might be more accurate. They watched as the once mighty alien armada scattered like startled pigeons, their ships desperately trying to navigate through what had effectively become the solar system's largest minefield. Several vessels managed to break free of Earth's orbital sphere, trailing pieces of their once pristine hull plating. Others were less fortunate, learning the hard way that human space trash had no respect for advanced alien engineering. Zephyr leaned back in his chair, watching the aftermath of humanity's greatest passive-aggressive victory. You know, he mused, taking another sip of his definitely not coffee. I don't think this is quite what the UN had in mind when they asked us to solve the space debris problem. Sir Captain Chen interrupted. The Kraxons are broadcasting one final message. The alien commander appeared one last time, its formerly pristine armor, now looking like it had gone 10 rounds with a meteoroid shower. It began, then had to dodge what appeared to be a floating bowl of freeze-dried ice cream. We will remember this. 1 week after what the media had dubbed the Great Space Spring cleaning, beating out trash wars, and attack of the killer garbage in a global poll, Zephyr found himself in the most awkward diplomatic meeting of his career. The Kraxon ambassador, sporting several dents that their repair technicians had insisted were beauty marks, sat across from Earth's delegation in the UN chamber. Let me understand this correctly, the ambassador said, its mandibles clicking in what might have been embarrassment. You didn't build this weapon system. Build it, Zephyr laughed, straightening his perpetually crooked tie. We spent 60 years trying to figure out how to clean it up. The fact that it worked as a defense system was just a happy accident, like penicillin, but with more explosions. He pulled up a holographic display showing the current state of Earth's orbit. Where there had once been a chaotic cloud of debris, there were now neat lanes of cleared space, courtesy of their impromptu orbital cleanup operation. The thing is, Zephyr continued, your fleet did us a huge favor. We've been putting off cleaning up our orbital sphere for decades. Nothing motivates planetary housekeeping quite like an alien invasion. The ambassador's antennae twitched. You're saying you defeated the most powerful fleet in 16,000 star systems, with garbage? Well, when you say it like that, it sounds ridiculous, Zephyr replied. We prefer to think of it as weaponized procrastination. The human delegation tried very hard not to look too smug as the ambassador reviewed footage of their mighty warships being taken out by everything from defunct satellites to a particularly aggressive frozen bag of astronaut food. Our tactical analysts, the Kraxon admitted, have recommended adding check local debris fields to our standard invasion protocols. It paused. They were quite insistent about it. Some of them were crying. General Rodriguez, who had finally gotten some sleep and only slightly resembled a caffeinated zombie, leaned forward. Perhaps we could interest you in our new planetary defense consultation service? We're experts in turning orbital catastrophes into strategic advantages. The meeting concluded with the signing of what would become known as the Clean Space Treaty, though some argued it should have been called the Please Don't Turn Your Trash into Weapons Agreement. The Kraxons pledged to recognize Earth's sovereignty, and provide advanced technology for space cleanup efforts. In return, humanity promised to never, ever tell anyone how they had defeated the mighty Kraxon Empire. As the alien delegation departed, considerably humbler than when they had arrived, Zephyr found himself staring at the new orbital cleanup project plans on his tablet. The irony wasn't lost on him. It had taken an alien invasion to finally get funding for the space debris cleanup he'd been requesting for years. "You know what the really funny part is," he said to no one in particular, watching the last Kraxon ship limp away, still decorated with what appeared to be a "My Child is an Honor Student" bumper sticker from a 1995 satellite. "We're probably the first species in history to save ourselves by cleaning up our room." Dr. Wong appeared beside him, clutching what was definitely her 15th cup of coffee. "Actually, the funniest part is that we've been invited to give a presentation at the Galactic Council next month. They want us to talk about innovative defensive strategies." "Are we going to tell them it was all an accident?" "Of course not," she grinned. "We're going to write a very serious paper about the strategic applications of orbital debris management and pretend we planned it all along." As Zephyr watched the cleanup crews begin their work, he couldn't help but smile. Humanity had faced its first alien invasion and won not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through their unique ability to turn their own mistakes into victories. "Well," he said, straightening his tie one last time, "I suppose we should start cleaning up. Though maybe we should keep just a little bit of garbage up there, for emergencies. After all, you never knew when you might need to play another game of cosmic dodgeball with an alien armada."